Dispatch, I'll clear and check it out. I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. Just another loud party in a town overrun with loud parties. I was watching the back door on this call while several of my partners were writing tickets up front. Things were well in hand, so clearing this loud party to take another loud party call a block away seemed like the thing to do. Back in those days, I didn't realize I got paid by the hour. So I walked down the block and, wouldn't you know it, another loud party. This one had about 100 people or so hanging out front. I walked across the parking lot and lit the group up with my flashlight. "Police!" I yelled. This was the point where the underage drinkers would take off, clearing out most of the trouble. The ones of legal age would give me that "we aren't doing anything wrong" look, and then I could sort out the homeowners. At least, that's what usually happened. This time, the crowd in front went at each other. Evidently, I had walked right into a huge brawl. As a pile of bodies fell to the ground in the street, the gunshots rang out. That's right, gunshots. Pretty much the last thing I expected at the time. And that was my fault. You see, I fell for one of the most common issues that gets cops killed: complacency. You see, I assumed I knew what was going to happen, and you know what they say about assuming. That's right, I was the ass. It's time to start telling our own stories. I'm Steve Kellums, and welcome to Blue Canary. Today's policing is more dangerous than ever. Staying sharp and following proper professional and tactical procedures is the key to staying alive. And I couldn't think of a better guest to talk to about this topic than Scott Savage. Scott Savage began his career in public safety at the age of 19, first as an EMT and then as a licensed paramedic working in a busy emergency medical system. In 1999, he became a police officer with the Palo Alto Police Department in California, where he worked assignments including patrol, narcotics, and SWAT. After a great career with Palo Alto PD, he joined the Santa Clara Police Department as an officer and continues to serve there today. In 2019, Scott founded the Savage Training Group, which provides high-quality law enforcement training across the United States. Scott, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
When I was looking around this season, I was kind of thinking about and focusing on that war on cops and really what it means and what we're seeing across the country. Now, you've been involved in law enforcement training at a fairly high level for a while. How did you get into law enforcement to start with?
So I was a paramedic before I was a cop here in San Francisco Bay Area near San Jose, and loved everything about it, but then was looking to make a change and kind of look for a career field that was similar to that. I wanted something that was emotionally challenging, physically challenging, something I could be proud of. And my grandfather was a police officer. I had a great grandfather that was a judge, and so maybe it was in the blood a little bit. And his mid-20s, applied and became a cop, and still serving today as a police officer in the Bay Area of California. And it's been a great career, 24 years.
That's an interesting area to be involved in law enforcement. There's a lot of new ideas that come out of that area, but you also see a pretty high amount of crime.
Yeah, new ideas is a very kind way of saying it's a goofy place to work. Being a cop in California is a blessing and a curse. The curse part is it's a very highly political area, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, to work. We have ever-changing laws, ever-changing use of force laws, and quite frankly, unrealistic expectations from the public and politicians. And that would be fine if it was Mayberry. That it really wouldn't be that big of a deal if there really wasn't anything going on here. But this is an extremely high crime area with gangs and shootings and murders. And so to police an area that has a lot of, crime and action, yet has a lot of strange laws and, again, unrealistic expectations from the public, is a challenge. But I think it makes us pretty sharp. It certainly has paid off in the law enforcement training world, because I think as a California cop, you just got to be so good at what you're doing in order to stay out of trouble, right? In order to stay out of being civilly sued, but nowadays stay out of jail and being criminally charged for what potentially was lawful activity, but maybe someone didn't like it. So I think working in this area has kind of been a blessing as far as being able to then provide training around the nation.
I could definitely relate to that, having had my entire career in a major college, university town. I'm kind of used to that mindset that you have to deal with. You're not allowed to be anything but incredibly professional. And then because of all of those other things that are going on, you have to be incredibly efficient as well. You said something interesting there about the changes in expectation. And I think that's a challenge that we're seeing across the country is politicians keep moving the goalposts on us.
Yeah, that's right. And unfortunately, these laws are made when special interest groups or lobbyists or squeaky wheels make enough noise. And a lot of the laws that you see in the book, certainly like our new use of force law that came out in 2020 and then sort of spread its way across the nation in Illinois and to Washington. I think parts of Oregon have our law now. You can tell, the folks that wrote the law meant well. And maybe I'd say their heart's in the right place, right? They thought they're doing a good thing. But as a practitioner in the field, when you're dealing with using force on other humans, when you're dealing with split second decision making and humans in conflict, you look at a law like this and you smirk at it because you're like, this would be great if we were robots. This would be great if we had a 2020 hindsight. But there's a piece in our new law that talks about the suspect's apparent intent, as if police officers can somehow divine from the gods what the suspect's thinking.
Yeah, I wonder they could maybe give me the lotto numbers too. That'd make life easier.
Right. And to date, I haven't been trained on how to read suspects' minds. So I suppose if the suspect's telling us, hey, I'm going to come kill you, then we know his intent. But short of that, the guy's just walking down the street holding an axe. I really don't know what his intent is. So that and a lot of other things nowadays, we're really asking police officers to perform in a way that is probably beyond human performance limitations.
Now, do you think that's because the people making these laws don't understand actually what it takes to accomplish the tasks they're setting?
I think so. And you're an experienced police officer, as am I. And our phone probably doesn't ring from legislative bodies and politicians that are trying to make laws to ask us, hey, is this going to work, guys? Just as the practitioners in the field, is this something that's workable, or is this just setting you up for failure? Are we just putting all the onus on the officer and none on the suspect? Are we creating laws that maybe are trying to do X? We're trying to save people's lives. We're trying to prevent tragedy. Great, those are admirable goals, but the way they're going about it is probably unrealistic. So I would say yes. In answer to your question, it's just one shakes their head when they look at some of these laws and what's being asked of police officers because humans are humans, and we can predict what humans are going to do. We understand, how quickly humans can think, and officers are humans as well. We understand how difficult it is to make split second decisions. We know and have, how long have humans been in conflict with each other? Tell me any of those times over millennia that it looks good on tape.
Yeah, violence is never pretty. And unfortunately, part of our job requires us at times to be violent. But that violence has a purpose. We're there to try to keep people safe, trying to keep everyone safe, including the person that we're trying to deal with. And that's a big challenge in a world filled with body cameras. Now, I'm a big fan of body cameras, but when you watch those things, it doesn't look nice.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we, meaning the law enforcement industry, are to blame as well. We're not innocent in this confusion, is kind of how I would describe it, that's going on between what the public expects and what we can actually do. Because I think there is confusion, or at least a misunderstanding. But our industry is part of the issue. And what I mean by that is look at any department's social media page. Pull a police department's Instagram, Facebook page. There's a really good chance that what's going to be on it is this super sanitized, fake, I would even say, version of what police work is. For example, perhaps there's a picture of, here's our canine, why don't you come pet him? Here's coffee with a cop. Here's National Night Out. Here's a tour of the police station. Here's a couple of our officers buying lemonade at a lemonade stand. Here's the mall during Christmas with a couple of officers with Santa hats on. Look how cute everyone is, and look how endearing everything is. And all of that there's nothing wrong with any of that, except to say this: we are advertising a version of police work that is not only cutesy and maybe unprofessional. I'm thinking of these videos where cops are singing, but more importantly is factually inaccurate, fake, probably manipulative. And we're trying to present ourselves as, hey, look how nice we are, right? Look, Steve and Scott, look at these guys. You can come pet their dog. Well, let me tell you something about this canine. The reason we have the canine is not so you can pet him. The reason we have it is so that he will bite and apprehend people who run away from us. I can't recall the last time I handed out stickers to kids when I was walking through the park, but I can recall the last time that I got in a physical confrontation with someone, because those happen more often. It's not to say that, well, community policing and community outreach is bad. No, don't misunderstand my message. I'm just telling you that what we're showing people about what police officers do is not true. That is a very small percentage of what we do. What we actually do is very adversarial. And in the town I live in, I'm not going to call the cops to my house to come over just so they can come over for dinner. I'm going to call them when something went wrong, right? So I think we advertise a version of what we do, and a very sanitized version, in hopes that people will like us. And we call it, this is our PR strategy. This is our social media strategy. And then when the public actually sees what we do on the body-worn camera that's released, when we shoot somebody or use force on somebody, they are rightfully shocked, because they go, wait a minute, these aren't the cops that I know. The cops that I know, it's touchy-feely, very, very friendly, and they're smiling and all this stuff. This shocks me. And they think it's something novel, when in fact, guys like you and me go, no, this is actually what you're seeing on this body-worn camera is what we really do, because that's what police work is about, And maybe we even have candidates nowadays who want to become cops because they see the social media and they're like, man, I can make a good salary, have great benefits, and my job consists of walking through the park, handing stickers out to the kids, or maybe, there's a CSI or SWAT or something else that they've gotten from TV or social media. And it's like, gosh, that's not really what you're going to be doing.
Oh, I could spend hours talking about my problems with Hollywood, and I agree completely with you. I think we've been in a public relations war forever, and we've been losing. And just like you just described, the approaches we've taken have kind of been a little bit backwards. By trying to sanitize what we do, we actually aren't educating people on what we do. That's why I love to talk to instructors like you, Scott, the people with experience that are actually doing it. When you look at law enforcement instructors across the United States, there's some fantastic ones out there, but there's also a lot of these subject matter experts that spent a week and a half actually doing police work, spent most of their time in the halls of education, getting those degrees, being a part of political processes, and then they come out and try to teach or lecture or reform a profession that, while they may have a badge, not all badges are the same, and the one they've got didn't actually do any of the work.
Yeah, that's true. To become a law enforcement instructor, quote unquote, the qualifications to do that certainly vary. And I guess anybody who's a cop can say, I'm going to go teach this, and you're technically a law enforcement instructor. But there's a lot of great ideas out there. I don't know that all of them are as worthy as the next. If I were king, I would have officers spend most of their time training in things like decision making, sense making, just really learning concepts and things to make great decisions. Because after all, isn't that what the public is criticizing police officers for? At its essence, they're criticizing the way we make decisions. We decide to shoot or not shoot. We decide to chase or not chase. We decide to, use our baton or not use a baton on this person. And so there are glaring issues, It's another thing, honestly, that's a fault of our own industry. There are glaring issues with the way we train police officers. There are glaring issues with the classes that we let them go to, the instructors that we're using, the way that we train them.
The methodology we're using, right?
The methodology. Most academies are block and silo type of training. Most in-service training leaves something to be desired. And so it's not really surprising when you kind of see what you see on different YouTube videos of officers not performing at a great level. A lot of it comes down to just kind of lousy training. We just really haven't invested the time and the money to train them to perform, how we want them to.
I'm a big fan of police reform. I've talked about that on this podcast before. I think those are the areas we need to look at reforming: the type of training that our officers are getting, the ability to have that training, which means you're going to have the staffing and the manpower that'll actually let you get these guys off and get some of that training. Now, you and your company, you teach a lot of tactical issues as well. Do you find that challenging, teaching tactical issues across the country? As you've said, you're coming out of kind of California, where we've got some really strange ideas about use of force, but they're not the only place with it. I mean, I'm right next door to Illinois, and they've gotten really wacky recently as well with some of the laws, or I guess removal of laws that they've put onto the books. Are you find that challenging, teaching all these different goalposts again?
Not really with the tactical part of it, because I think a lot of the instructors that teach for the Savage Training Group, we kind of own it. If we're teaching out of state, we're like, hey, I'm from California. First of all, I'm sorry for all of our laws that make it your way. Second of all, do you have any avocado or sprouts that I can put on my sandwich at lunch? And please tell me your favorite California joke. Great. Now that we're past that, we want to tell you about some of the experiences we've had, because like I mentioned, this is a busy area. We get a lot of practice, and we just have to perform at this crazy level. And it's given us the chance to really hone some of these skills, and the tactics that we present as far as like critical incident response, responding to hot calls and those types of things are very much universal. And they have certain goals in mind. How do we minimize criminal exposure, liability for the officer and the agency? How do we achieve the mission of getting the suspect in custody? And to the extent we can, how do we avoid a violent confrontation if possible? Years ago, maybe when you and I went to the academy, if it met the bare minimum threshold to use force, that was good enough, right? He met the criteria for us to use force on him. Nowadays, the public is asking for a little bit more than just kind of bare meets the minimum. And what we try to do is again, not give a checklist or some sort of rote procedure on how to handle in progress incidents or hot calls, but more is, what are the concepts that you need to know as an officer, as a supervisor who's working in the field, to deal with kind of the big incidents we're going to deal with, right? Active shooter, active killings, hostage barricades, solo barricades, fleeing suspects. Well, you could almost categorize any call into sort of fitting into one of those filters, if you will. We help officers understand that, because our adversaries are humans, there's probably only about, 7 or 8 things they can do. They can't fly. They can fight, freeze, flee, lie in wait, hide, comply, self-harm, posture, delay, something like that. There's only certain activities or actions they can take. And if you understand that, you can start to plan contingencies to deal with that. What we try to do with this stuff is, hey, don't think that you have to be on SWAT to be tactical. There's nothing, tactics isn't a piece of equipment or the unit that you're working. Tactics is your brain, and the way you think. And if you're able to outsmart your adversary, it really makes you kind of the top of your profession. You're able to outthink your adversary by using great tactics. Gone are the days when we can just rush into any call, park in front of the house, run up to the house, and jump into any fray. If you're going to do that, expect for officers to get hurt because you're giving away tactical advantage and giving to the suspect. Expect for courts now to start look at your pre-force conduct, not just was the shooting good, but kind of like, how did you get there? Expect for there to be problems. And so if you're interested in catching crooks, being efficient, being a professional, avoiding liability, and kind of doing things at a high level, tactics is something you're interested in.
I loved what you said about tactics being your brain, because I think that's a big mistake a lot of younger officers make, is that they think it's all about the tools, and really the tools are what's going on between your ears. That's where you need to do the exercising. That's the muscle you need to build for tactics. And it's great that there are people like you out there teaching that. Now, I think it's interesting that we went almost 2 decades where we saw deaths in the line of duty for law enforcement drop fairly dramatically. But then recently, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen that come back up until, actually getting close to arguably epidemic levels of murders of law enforcement officers across the United States right now. And it's as bad as we've seen in a very, very long time. And I started policing in the late 80s, early 90s when it was bad. Why is that? What do you think that is?
I'm always careful to, when it comes to statistics, to start assigning a cause. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a scientist. I can't tell you if it's cause or correlation. I can give you my opinions on things. And my personal opinion is, when you start decriminalizing things and you start to erode, society starts to erode the punishment for criminals, meaning the consequences are less than they used to be, people become emboldened. And I have seen that with my own eyes by being a police officer and watching things like in California, drugs became basically legal. Shoplifting, really wasn't prosecuted. Well, property crimes, not a it's not a big deal. Prison reform, bail reform, all these, quote, great ideas. I have personally witnessed the effects of that. And I can tell you quite plainly, people, suspects, criminals are not as afraid of the consequences as they used to be. And if you think about it, why would they be?
Because there are no consequences.
Absolutely. They are making a perfectly logical conclusion. These criminals are right on the money. It's like, yeah, I'm going to do more crime because there's less punishment. And if I get caught, it's actually not that big of a deal. So I'm going to do what I like doing, which is crime. It's, to me, it's just so obvious what's going on. But I think to others, they want to sort of muddy the waters with, well, no, it could be this and it could be that. It's like, okay, well, I'll leave it for the scientists and researchers to define why. And I do believe we should trust the data and trust the numbers. But I can tell you quite plainly, people are just not as afraid of the consequences as they used to be. So they're emboldened. They're going to take on the police. Look, we have a really dangerous job. We walk up on cars. We don't know what's inside. We go to people's houses. We go to calls involving weapons and violence. And so if you're going to tell me now that the criminal, if they get caught, they're not too afraid of getting punished by us, well, gee, go figure why they would want to take the police on more, why they would want to resist, flee, and all the stuff they're doing. It's so obvious when you see it in the street, but to try to explain it to somebody doesn't get to see the day to day, explain it to a lawmaker who doesn't have to go deal with these people. They're just making a law and then they go home. And if something goes bump in the night in their backyard or on their roof, trust me, they'll be the first to call. But for us, for us that are out there dealing with it, it's not quite as comfortable. We get to see, okay, these guys aren't afraid of consequences.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And I think another aspect of it, maybe almost as equally important, is Hollywood and our politicians have been dehumanizing the police recently with things like ACAB and the defund police movements. They've actually kind of make us less than people, which makes those people that want to resist us, makes it easier for them to do it.
That's right. That's exactly right. You dehumanize your adversary and it's easier to do anything against them. That's a great point.
One of the issues when we talk about that and the deaths of officers, we're starting to see a rise in those ambush killings of officers. And that's really when I reached out to you, because I wanted to talk to you about it from a tactical standpoint. I know that you guys over at the Savage Training Group have looked at this stuff and talk about this. And I was really interested to get your ideas or thoughts on not only the issue involving officer ambushes, but maybe some things that officers need to be thinking about or more cognizant of while they're out working every day.
Ambush attacks is something near and dear to our heart. One of our lead instructors, Dan Flippo, who teaches our critical incident response courses, like our tactical courses. The last call, when he just recently retired as the deputy chief of Santa Cruz, California PD, and the last kind of major incident he went on right before he left was the ambush and killing of a Santa Cruz County Sheriff's deputy named Damon Gutzweiler, which you can read about, and terribly tragic and sad story where some nut up in the mountains basically ambushed and killed this young man. So it's not lost on us. It's not lost on us, the gravity of what we're dealing with. And so when the issue with dealing with an ambush is it's probably the hardest tactical scenario to solve. If it's just a guy in a house and, he's held up in his house and he's got a gun and he's wanted for whatever, well, it's not really that hard to deal with. We'll surround it. We'll try to call him out, and we'll use certain, tactical tools against some gas or whatever to get the guy out. It's not terribly challenging, to be honest. But the ambush where someone either just goes after some cop who's parked in a parking lot writing reports or something like that, totally spontaneous, or B, worse probably, phones in a fake call to lure officers in and then sits in a position of advantage and attacks the officers when they're vulnerable. How do you defend against those? Those are terrible circumstances. If you're a military, the military rather would say, we'll fight through the ambush. And that's, great tactic because you're in a kill zone. So try to fight through it. But that sort of implies the ambush is already occurring. So kind of the best guess or best advice we can give officers is to be very, very methodical and calculating about what you're doing. If you're just going to calls willy nilly and you're just, well, let's just get there and we'll figure out what we have. If that's your attitude towards going to incidents, playing with fire, who else would do that? I mean, the Super Bowl. Think about the Super Bowl or the last football game you watched. The quarterback doesn't get in a huddle and go, "Hey guys, just run whatever play you want." Right? Just run whatever play you want and we'll do the best we can. It would be chaos. There needs to be coordination amongst the responding officers. There needs to be a plan. What play are we using? Is this the high risk stop play, or is this the surround and call out play? Are we creating a perimeter? Is this a disengagement play? Are we making immediate contact? Like, what play, for lack of a better word, are you calling? If you're a supervisor and you're like, well, I don't want to micromanage the guys on the radio. I don't want to tell them what to do. Okay. Using the football analogy, you're the coach. Does the coach stand on the sideline of the Major League Football game and say, hey guys, I don't want to tell you what to do because I don't want to micromanage you. So do whatever you want when a call comes out, when a play is happening? No, of course not. That's your job, is to direct the actions of the officers out there. So when responding to calls, probably a great idea to have some tactics, some methods, to always be trying to create a tactical advantage. And I'm not saying on every call you go on, you have to low crawl up with like a Bowie knife in your teeth or something like that. I'm just advocating, are you trying to exploit some tactical advantage? I mean, we have radios, we have weapons, we can choose when to arrive at calls, we can be selective and conniving about how we're responding to incidents. Or are you just parking in front of the house and hoping for the best? When you go to calls, I mean, you got to, again, back to the suspect actions. There's probably about 8 things that suspect can do, right? Fight, freeze, flee, posture, delay, just, scream and yell at you, lie in wait or ambush you, which is the one we're talking about, self-harm, that would be another one, hide, or the last one, and the one we never worry about, is comply. If all you're doing when you go to calls is you're just, gosh, I hope he complies. If the tactic that you're using will only work if he complies, you are setting yourself up for failure. You've got to be ready for all the stuff he can do. And so if I'm going to a call, like, can I park down the street a little bit, at least get out on foot, and be able to see this? If the call sounds a little hinky, can I put a phone call back into the reporting party and try to get more information? If the guy thinks we're going to come through the front, can I go through the back? Like whatever your call is there some way? Is there something you can do to create a little bit more of a tactical advantage what we have? Like, I do more hiding in the dark and calling people out than I do anything like cool looking, right?
Right.
It's just being a little bit of sneaky, being a little bit conniving, be a little bit manipulating. Gosh, that's what's tactical. It's not what kind of gear you have and how many guns you have and knives and flashlights and tourniquets. That's all kit. That's all tools. The stuff that's going on between your ears, man, that's what will save your life.
You're talking about pre-planning. You're talking about building good tactical habits. And sometimes that doesn't look very good to the public, right? They're like, oh, he was mean, or he was short with me, and that wasn't very nice. But when you don't know what you're going on in every call, you kind of have to approach everything as though something might happen. It doesn't mean you're unprofessional. It doesn't mean that you're rude. But sometimes having to go to calls at that level can put off other people, and then they complain and we hear about it. That seems to be an ongoing problem, right?
Right. And so that's a conversation that needs to be had internally with your department. Should we even be going to, let's start with this. Should we even be going to every call that comes in? If your department is like, well, we're, all about service, and if, no call too small, they call, we go, and all that stuff, that sounds great. And it's very like motivating and great for the public. What about for the officer? How about we're a little bit more, we use some discretion. How about the supervisor has the opportunity to cancel whatever call doesn't sound right? How about we exploit technology like drones? Or, hey, you know what, Scott, we don't have a drone. Okay, cool. Park down the street and pull out your binoculars and
Right.
look. What do you see? Because you know what? You might see the guy with a gun.
And I think that's really important what you just said, because I came from a department where we took every single call and we made a report on every single call. That got old really quickly for the officers, and you kind of started building habits in their heads to where they weren't responding to calls where they were needed. They were simply going through rote mechanics. They weren't no longer thinking tactically or thinking of their own safety as much as they were thinking of how fast can I get this crap done with.
Right. And we've all been there when we're trying to clear the board, as they call it. We're trying to clear the calls on the computer.
A clean screen is a happy screen.
Yeah, and that's great, but that's not serving us well. And last time I checked, if you think about it, nobody in the public is marching in the streets being like, you cops got to get the calls quicker. You got to take action quicker. You got to, no, they're asking us to slow down, be more methodical, handle things more deliberately.
And I always tell people that I train that they get paid by the hour, not the call. And they need to approach it like that because then they'll be safer.
That's true. That's absolutely true. So take your time, be more methodical. Stop rushing into calls just to get that call over with. You don't know what you're going on. And, I know there's people that say like, well, even police trainers, be respectful to everyone, but have a plan to kill them. Yeah, I don't know. That doesn't sound that great in this day and age. So what I would say is perhaps a little differently is let's be careful. Let's not rush into every call. And just because somebody called 911 doesn't mean I have to respond. I mean, if you really understand the rules, quote unquote, the rules, there's a great legal doctrine you should probably look up in your state, no matter where you're listening from, called the Public Duty Doctrine, which really talks about, do the police have an affirmative duty to protect people? And 9 times out of 10 in the state you're in, the answer is no. And that's a shocking thing for police officers to read, but I would advocate just study that concept a little bit for this reason. Once you understand the rules and you understand, gosh, I don't have to run into every fray that's going on. I can sit back for a second, wait for my cover unit, and then go in with a plan. Like a quick plan is better than no plan at all. Like, hey guys, there's the guy we're looking for. I'll be lethal, you be less lethal, you be hands and commands. You work the radio and you whatever. Real quick, just come up with some idea of what we're about to do, or I'll be contact, you be cover. Hey, this guy starts shooting, we're going to retreat to that tree right there. Like having an idea of what you're going into, that's going to set you up for success. And so whether it's an ambush or just a dangerous, violent suspect we're trying to take off, just having an idea, again, that quarterback mentality. Hey guys, this is what we know. This is what we're going to do. That's huge. And that doesn't take you being on SWAT or anything like that to do. And, you don't need to come to our trainings. I'd love for you to come to our trainings at the Savage Training Group, but honestly, you can get with your partners tonight in the parking lot and talk about, hey, what are the 5 big calls we go on? Okay. What's our default SOP when those calls come on? That way we can start to anticipate each other's actions. Okay. What's our contingency plans if something doesn't go right? What would a swatting call? Like that's a big thing happening now in schools, right? High schools around the country are getting swatted. Okay. What are the characteristics of a swatting call? They call a non-emergency number, usually reporting something very violent, usually saying specific weapons like I have a MAC-10, I have an Uzi. They're not calling 911. There's never a second 911 call. We can't reproduce anything they're saying. There's keys to this stuff. There's clues. Let's start using some of that stuff. And again, becoming methodical about how we approach things. Methodical, not just they called, so we arrived on scene and then tried to make split-second decisions to figure it out.
I think we need to learn the lessons from the past, but not be stuck in the training of it. We need to be innovative in the things that we're doing, particularly when we talk about law enforcement ambushes. I remember that if you look at the statistics again, and I agree with you have to be careful with statistics. I'm a fan of them, but you really got to be careful with them. And when you look at the early 90s was an incredibly violent time for law enforcement officers, but the violence we were experiencing then was very different. It was like you got caught up in stuff as you were doing your job. The violence that's coming to law enforcement officers today is targeted towards them specifically because they are cops. And that requires a little bit of a different mindset change, doesn't it?
I think it does. My grandfather was a police officer in Amarillo, Texas. He was a detective that was killed in the line of duty when he arrested a couple of guys for burglary, and he missed a gun on one of them. And so as he's driving them back to the station, this guy pulls out a gun, shoots and kills my grandfather, and that was in 1945. That obviously has been going on for a very long time. The stuff that we're seeing now is that plus the intentional hunting of police officers. And it's not common. I wouldn't say, this happens all the time. No, thank God, it's very infrequent. But nonetheless, we've got to prepare for that. And how do you prepare for that? Well, it's the same thing you do for every call. You use good tactics. There's not a lot of difference. The public's talking about de-escalation all the time. They love that word, de-escalation.
Yeah.
Okay. For the officers out there, what's the difference between de-escalation and just using good tactics? Probably not much, right?
Right.
If we rush where we have to rush, but don't rush when we don't have to rush. If we try to use tools, technology, resources to our advantage to create a disadvantage for the suspect, if we try to use what can we do to get this guy into custody with the least chance of a violent confrontation? Doesn't mean it's always going to work, because the suspect gets a vote and everything we do, it's not, it's up to him. We're just reacting to it. But are there things that we can do? Yeah. And a lot of it is pretty basic stuff. Don't rush in, wait for your fill, use distance. Distance gives you time to plan, and a plan, even a simple plan, is better than no plan at all. If the guy's not going with a program and we have some semblance of control, communication, containment, let's try to talk to him. And something maybe a little bit more nuanced and elegant than just drop the knife, 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 drop the knife.
I've been guilty of that myself. I have to admit it.
We all have. Yeah, we all have. So just maybe learning a few different things. Like in one of the classes we teach, we try to give you, here's what to say, instead of just drop the knife, drop the knife, drop the knife. When that doesn't work, here's what to say. Because sometimes we just tell cops, well, don't do that. Don't get in a verbal loop. Okay, well, then what should I say? So we're trying to maybe provide some of those tools that folks can use. But man, the number one thing that officers can do to, I think, deal with ambushes and to the extent they can avoid violent confrontations when possible is engage the brain. Get great training in decision making, sense making. Sense making is a fancy term for what is going on here. Like, what is this? Reading the clues and the cues to figure out, man, what is this? What kind of call is this? And if you don't have a lot of experience on the street, or you work in a really slow area, well, go get more training to kind of supplement that. Less experience you have, the more training you need, right? You need to go through those reps and those creating those mental models so that you know how to respond to these things when something kicks off. Because it doesn't matter if you're in a little town or a big town, slow area, rural area, whatever, eventually something's going to kick off in your jurisdiction. And it's going to be your turn to confront that issue. And man, once the Super Bowl has arrived, so to speak, there's no time to practice anymore. Now's the time to rehearse and practice.
Scott, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today. If people out there are interested in your training, what's available, how can they get a hold of you? How can they find out more about the Savage Training Group?
Yeah, go to savagetraininggroup.com. Savagetraininggroup.com is our website. That's where we have all the different classes that we offer, both in person and online. And each is, I can tell you, carefully crafted to help give cops the tools they need to be successful. And we teach in a bunch of different states. And if we're not in your state, we'd love to have you host us. And that way we can meet in person. And I know I speak for me and all the instructors at the Savage Training Group. We just want to help keep cops safe and be successful. So we'd love to have you come join us at a training.
Thanks, Scott.
Appreciate it.
And that's the story we have to tell. Thank you for joining. As always, I'm curious what questions you're getting asked. What isn't the news covering? What story needs to be told? Connect with me at bluecanarypodcast@gmail.com.